Welcome you. Thanks for bringing your sources our way. You know what we do here at the Deep Dive? You share what you're digging into, and we pull out the most valuable insights, those key understandings that can really shift your perspective so you can become truly well-informed without feeling like you're lost in the weeds.
Exactly. And you highlighted a topic that I think many will find resonates deeply.
Hmm.
Understanding those, frustrating patterns of underachievement that can stick with us as adults and figuring out how to break free.
Hmm.
As you pointed out, this isn't just about achieving external success, but also about that internal sense of fulfillment and living a life aligned with who you truly are.
Right. For you, as someone who values gaining knowledge quickly and thoroughly, those aha moments are key, but definitely without getting bogged down in endless details.
Yeah.
So, our mission today, drawing from the excerpts you shared from your own worst enemy, is to really get to the core of why these patterns of underachievement take hold and, more importantly, to explore clear paths toward creating lasting change.
And your own worst enemy looks like a particularly insightful resource for this.
Mm.
The author isn't just presenting abstract theories. They're drawing on extensive research and years of direct experience working with individuals grappling with these very challenges.
Okay.
So let's jump right into that initial observation that sparks the author's exploration.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author begins with a really compelling personal story, reconnecting with a childhood friend named Pete. By all accounts, Pete had been this incredibly bright, promising young person.
Yeah, high potential.
Exactly. And years later, when the author sees Pete again, they're struck by this profound difference. It's described as his bright light was extinguished. That image of lost potential is really powerful, isn't it?
It is. That stark contrast between early promise and the later reality really makes you stop and think. It
Hmm.
raises the question, what happens along the way?
Right.
What are the dynamics at play that can lead to such a significant dimming of potential? And it's that very question that motivates the author's search for answers.
Which leads us to the author's quest for understanding. With a background in researching self-esteem, their natural first step was to turn to the existing scientific literature to try and make sense of Pete's situation.
Hmm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The research landscape on underachievement wasn't quite what they anticipated.
What's fascinating here is the author's discovery that the existing body of research primarily focused on observable behaviors, largely academic performance. It didn't really delve into that internal subjective experience of the individual struggling with this.
Right, the why behind it.
Exactly. And perhaps surprisingly, the intense focus on this topic seemed to peak in the 1970s and then sort of faded, leaving behind some theoretical ideas and intervention strategies that felt a bit out of date.
And the outcomes from standard psychotherapy approaches were, well, they weren't consistently effective. Years of work without reliable results.
Kind of hit or miss.
Yeah. Group therapy seemed to show a bit more promise, but notably, there was a real lack of thorough research into using family therapy as a way to address this. It paints a picture of a field that was still searching for a clear understanding.
It does. It suggests a need to look at this from a different angle, perhaps one that goes beyond just the individual's actions in isolation and considers the wider context, both what's happening inside and what's happening around them.
Make sense?
And speaking of the external context, the author then shifts to a rather concerning observation about society as a whole.
Yes, this part really made me think. The author suggests that our societal standards have almost been lowered, seemingly as a way to avoid the difficulty of hard work.
Huh. Lowered standards. How so?
Well, these lower expectations, they argue, have seeped into our institutions and become almost normalized in public life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes you wonder about the subtle messages we're constantly receiving. The author provides some very specific and quite striking examples of this lowering of standards. What stood out to you from those?
Well, a couple really stayed with me. The idea that advertisers might suggest that being young and hip somehow means being ignorant of important subjects like history or literature, almost as if intellectual curiosity is something to be, like, embarrassed about.
Wow.
And then there's that example from the 2000 elections where a political candidate who was an Ivy League graduate deliberately acted like they'd never heard of E.B. White just to appear more relatable, more like one of us. and avoid seeming too intellectual.
It's almost a performance of downplaying knowledge.
Exactly. It highlights this strange societal pressure to diminish competence or expertise in certain situations.
And the author doesn't stop there. They also bring up the issue of university grade inflation, something you hear about, but the examples here are quite eye-opening.
Absolutely. Instructors at Irvine being told to give senior English majors, as regardless of how they actually performed because of grade inflation happening elsewhere, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah, that really undermines the value.
And then the statistic that in 2001, a staggering 91% of Harvard seniors graduated with honors, with half of all grades being as or A minus. It really makes you question what those achievements actually signify.
It does. It suggests a system where the bar has been significantly lowered, perhaps unintentionally reinforcing a culture where striving for genuine excellence isn't necessarily the expectation.
Okay, so against this backdrop of individual struggles and these broader societal trends, how did the author approach trying to address this issue of underachievement?
Well, drawing on these observations, the author and their colleagues developed a pretty comprehensive strategy. A focus group experience for adults who are underachieving,
Okay.
combining elements of traditional classroom learning with practical coaching, group interaction, and crucially, deep self-examination.
That multifaceted approach makes a lot of sense, given the complexity of the issue. It's not just about lacking skills or motivation. It often involves deeper underlying beliefs and, established patterns of behavior.
Right. And the author's experience as a coach, psychotherapist, and workshop facilitator with, as I mentioned, hundreds of individuals struggling with underachievement really lends credibility to their insights.
Right. This book isn't just abstract theory. It's rooted in extensive real-world experience.
Mhm.
And the author ends the introduction by speaking directly to you, the listener. If any of this is hitting home, if you recognize these patterns in yourself or someone you know, they encourage you to keep reading, emphasizing that change is possible, but
But it takes work.
yeah, it requires a conscious decision and a real commitment to putting in the necessary effort.
Which brings us to the next section, the seductiveness of shortcuts. This really dives into the specifics of how these patterns can manifest in our daily lives, and the author uses a wonderful little story to illustrate this.
Oh, Auguste, his 4.5-hour journey to a store in Paris. It's almost funny, but as the author points out, it's a perfect object lesson in the seductiveness of shortcuts.
Okay.
He avoids planning, just wings it, gets completely lost, but then uses his charm and apologies to smooth everything over.
Okay. It's a classic example of someone prioritizing a certain image in a guest's case, perhaps a charming spontaneity over actually being efficient and effective.
Exactly. And the author draws a parallel to another intriguing character, Charlie, the self-proclaimed computer expert.
Yes, Charlie, the guy who would rather call for directions 10 times than just take a look at a map.
Right, and with computers, he'd jump right in, start clicking away, often manage a quick fix, but never really understood the fundamental problem.
So he looked like a whiz sometimes.
Sometimes. But while he might have these seemingly miraculous solutions sometimes, his overall approach was disorganized and often led to more problems down the line.
Right.
The key insight here isn't just that shortcuts are tempting, but that they often prioritize a desired self-image, charming, quick thinking, over actual effectiveness and can lead to long-term inefficiency.
It highlights this tendency to favor immediate, often superficial fixes over the more rigorous and time-consuming process of truly understanding and preparing.
Yeah.
And the author then brings in a really powerful reference to the parable of the 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins.
That really drives the point home, doesn't it? The wise virgins made preparations in advance, while the foolish ones who skipped that crucial step paid the price when they ran out of oil.
It underscores the importance of foresight and being prepared, not just for major events, but even in our day-to-day tasks.
And what's important to note about Auguste, as the author emphasizes, is that he wasn't unintelligent or incapable of planning. He actively chose to rely on other skills, like his charm and his ability to recover quickly.
Right, so it wasn't inability, it was a choice.
Yeah. This shows the appeal of shortcuts. They can sometimes work, and they can play to our strengths, but they often come with hidden costs.
Which leads us to a really crucial part of the author's analysis, identifying these self-limiting patterns. They present a summary of characteristics they've observed in highly potential people, or HPPs, who habitually engage in these behaviors. And as you listen to this list, it's worth considering how many of these might resonate with you. The author identifies a significant group they call successful low HPPs, or SLHPPs, which refers to individuals with high potential who consistently underachieve.
Okay, so SLHPPs. Got it.
Absolutely. This is where we start to see the specific ways in which underachievement can manifest. What are some of the key characteristics the author outlines?
Okay, so the list includes things like procrastination, getting involved in situations, relationships, jobs that are clearly beneath your capabilities and therefore unsatisfying.
Settling.
Yeah, settling.
Yeah.
And gravitating towards non-traditional but still unsatisfying occupations, often as a way to avoid structure or authority.
Those are common threads, this avoidance of structure and a settling for less than one is capable of. What else is on the list?
Feeling stuck in supposedly temporary situations that never actually become permanent, experiencing self-doubt and fluctuating self-esteem,
Uh-huh.
and harboring fears of not living up to your own expectations, which I think is a really important nuance.
It is. It's not always about external pressures.
Mm,
Often, the biggest critic and the source of the highest standards is ourselves.
definitely.
What follows from those internal struggles?
Blaming failures on external factors, bad luck, or other people instead of taking personal responsibility, feeling socially inadequate and like you're falling behind your peers in life milestones. A persistent feeling that time is running out without having really started, and sadly, periods of depression. It's a pretty comprehensive and, for many, I imagine, a rather sobering list.
It is. And as the author rightly points out, the more yes answers you have to these statements, the more likely it is that you've adopted similar patterns.
Yeah.
Recognizing these tendencies is really the crucial first step towards making any kind of meaningful change. It's about being honest with yourself about the degree to which you might be unintentionally holding yourself back.
And the author is keen to emphasize that underachievement isn't this extreme dramatic thing that only affects these super gifted or the reckless. It often shows up in much more subtle, less noticeable ways.
That's an important point. It's not always about spectacular failures. Sometimes it's about a consistent pattern of settling for less.
Exactly. That common feeling of knowing you could probably do so much more with just a little extra effort, but somehow never quite getting there.
Right.
And the author notes that it's actually quite rare to meet someone who truly feels they've tapped their full potential.
It speaks to this inherent human capacity and often untapped reservoir of abilities within us. And the author stresses that even those seemingly small, subtle choices, ignoring ambitions, not giving your best, accepting less than you truly desire, these chip away at your possibilities and ultimately limit who you become. To illustrate this, they share a case study about a woman named Stacy and her long-held dream of becoming a choreographer. Despite having connections in the dance world, she's never actually pursued it.
And what's the underlying reason for her inaction? It boils down to fear, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Fear of not being good enough, fear of disappointment.
Precisely. The classic what if I try and fail scenario. And while Stacy's life hasn't been a disaster, she has played it safe repeatedly at important life junctures and now feels like she's lagging behind her peers in terms of those significant milestones like marriage and career.
Yeah.
It shows how even seemingly small acts of avoidance can accumulate over time and lead to a sense of unfulfilled potential and regret.
And this can be incredibly frustrating for those around the underachievers who see their potential so clearly.
Totally.
The author touches on why helping can be so difficult and why there's often resistance to change from the underachiever themselves.
Yes, the author explains that people who try to help often end up withdrawing, feeling like their efforts are futile, sometimes even labeling the underachiever as unchangeable. That example of Ford Motor Company offering bonuses for gifted but low-achieving personnel to just leave is pretty extreme, but it highlights the frustration.
It really does. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of well-meaning but persistent encouragement about your potential, you might recognize that feeling of being hounded.
Oh, yeah.
The author makes a really insightful point here, that this constant pressure can lead to resistance, making it difficult to even distinguish between what you genuinely don't want and what you're simply pushing back against.
Which brings us to a potentially challenging idea. The notion that self-limiting behavior involves a choice. The author acknowledges that this might feel like an accusation or contradict your own experience of feeling like you've tried hard despite setbacks.
It's a crucial point to grapple with. It's not about blaming the individual, but about recognizing the agency we have, even within the constraints of our circumstances.
Exactly. Even if you feel like you've been fighting an uphill battle, the author argues that choice is still an integral part of the equation.
Okay.
And this leads to a discussion about the real cost of these self-limiting behaviors.
The author shares the example of Jim, who achieved a certain level of career success by following the expected path, but in doing so, missed out on what Sartre called the frightening freedom of tapping into his own inner direction.
And that's the key, isn't it? All forms of self-limiting behavior, even those that seem to offer some kind of security or comfort, come at a cost to our overall well-being.
Right.
Conversely, actively pursuing our curiosities and talents to the best of our ability is deeply nourishing.
It's that paradox the author highlights.
Yeah.
People consistently turning away from the very things that would bring them the most satisfaction.
Yeah. Why do we do that?
Sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, and then waking up later wondering how they ended up where they are.
So to get you thinking about this in your own life, the author suggests a really valuable self-reflection exercise. Grab a piece of paper, as they suggest, and list the things you do that actually limit your effectiveness.
This is where the abstract becomes concrete. It's about identifying those specific behaviors, those little habits that might be holding you back.
Right. And then critically, to reflect on how you undercut yourself. Are you being too casual in formal situations? Too strict when a more relaxed approach would be better? Are you procrastinating, giving less than your best, missing deadlines?
Could be anything.
Yeah, the list could be anything from being consistently late to avoiding situations where you fear failure.
And the real insight comes from noticing when and how you make these choices, paying particular attention to those choices that help you avoid situations that might threaten your sense of competence or your self-image.
Which sets the stage for understanding that there are different styles of underachievement. The author categorizes common patterns of self-limiting behavior into distinct styles, which are characterized by specific avoidance mechanisms and rationalizations.
Okay, different styles. Like what?
Let's touch on a few of them. First, there are the stop shorts.
The stop shorts are fascinating. They're aware of their abilities, they have ambitions, they make real progress, but they consistently hold back from fully reaching their goals.
Why, though?
It's often tied to a fear of crossing that finish line, of what comes after completion, the new responsibilities or roles. Think of someone who takes all the courses for a degree but never finishes the thesis, or someone who passes the bar exam but never actually practices law.
Ah, okay, got it. Then there are the self-doubters or self-attackers. This style really highlights the internal conflict.
Absolutely. They use self-criticism almost as a preemptive defense.
Yeah.
By attacking themselves, they feel like they're not settling for mediocrity, even though they are, in a different way. And if they do achieve something, they often dismiss it as a fluke, feeling like they don't deserve the praise and fearing they'll be exposed as frauds.
We also have the charmers. This type relies on their personality to navigate situations, often making promises they can't keep and then disappearing when things get difficult, hoping others will just let it slide.
Avoids the tough conversation.
Yeah, they avoid those uncomfortable conversations.
And finally, the misunderstood geniuses. This is the archetype who believes their lack of success is solely due to others not grasping their brilliance or being jealous of their unique talent.
Right, it's everyone else's fault.
They use excuses about their ideas being too advanced as a shield. The author makes a key distinction here between this and genuine genius, which usually finds a way to create despite a lack of initial acceptance.
All these styles highlight the different ways we can get in our own way.
Definitely.
And the author then shifts the focus to the role of family and early experiences in shaping these patterns, using the example of Doug and his daughter Amy.
This anecdote really illustrates how even well-meaning family dynamics can inadvertently contribute to underachievement. Amy, despite her father's belief in her potential, has this nonchalant attitude towards her grades, saying she's just not trying.
And the communication between Doug and Amy is so telling. Doug starts with seriousness, but then almost immediately descends into whining and pleading, which is clearly not an effective way to motivate Amy.
No. It highlights these ingrained, often unproductive communication patterns within families.
Which ties into the next crucial concept, the subjective nature of our picture of the world. The author explains that our understanding of reality isn't a perfect reflection, but more of a working model built on concepts we formed over time.
Like a mental map.
Exactly. Think of it like the mental map you use to navigate your daily life. It's not always perfectly accurate, but it's what you rely on.
And these concepts, even if they're not entirely accurate, become deeply ingrained and operate almost unconsciously, becoming increasingly resistant to change.
How so?
It's like once you draw a conclusion, it then guides what you pay attention to and how you interpret future experiences.
Okay.
And the earlier and more central a concept is, the more other ideas get built upon it, making that subjective worldview feel increasingly solid, even if it's flawed.
But not impossible to change.
No? However, the author is careful to point out that while difficult, changing these long-held beliefs is not impossible with astute, well-thought-out efforts.
And one of the foundational elements that shapes this picture of the world is our temperament.
Right.
The author introduces Chess and Thomas's 9 dimensions of infant temperament, highlighting how our innate predispositions provide a starting point for how we interact with the world.
This framework from Chess and Thomas helps us understand that our starting point for how we react to the world isn't a blank slate, and how certain temperaments might interact with early experiences to either foster or hinder achievement.
This innate temperament then interacts with our early experiences, shaping our self-concept. And the author makes a particularly interesting observation about a significant proportion of successful low HPPs, or SLHPPs, those with high potential who consistently underachieve.
Yes, the paradox of being easy and wonderful.
Mm.
Many of these individuals were described by their parents as easygoing and charming, both as children and adults.
Right.
The only complaint parents often had was this school thing.
Which makes you wonder if that very ease and social pleasantness could somehow be a contributing factor to the underachievement.
How could that be?
Well, the author suggests that for children who are perhaps too indulged or always the center of attention, escaping that corrupting influence later on requires significant conscious effort.
Oh, okay. And it's not just about temperament. Early talent also plays a complicated role.
Yeah. While gifted children often bring pride to their parents, those early displayed talents can lead to an expectation that things will always come easily.
Right.
The author notes that many SLHPPs were highly intelligent with multiple talents, and they simply got used to things being easy.
And these early experiences of easy success and parental pride contribute to the development of that self-concept who you think you are. It's shaped by observing how others react to you, what they say about your temperament and talents. While a stable self-image develops around age 9, those early years lay the groundwork.
And here's the trap. Being treated as special and experiencing that ease can create internal benchmarks, leading to the belief that life will always be this way, a charmed life.
But life isn't always easy.
Exactly. But the reality is life is more complex, and those labels like gifted or bright can have unintended consequences, especially when the child transitions to school and their worldview is still forming.
This transition to school can be a pivotal point. The author shares a poignant anecdote about their own daughter's initial love of stories fading into a weariness towards schoolwork, a fall from grace.
It's a common experience, it seems. Many SLHPPs start school full of enthusiasm, but become disillusioned by the slow pace or other aspects they find frustrating or insulting to their intelligence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
By middle school and adolescence, they often become critical of instruction, particularly in subjects like social sciences and government, where they perceive bias and a lack of true freedom of expression.
And this is the point where that joyous pursuit of learning often gets abandoned. They start just going through the motions, disengaging and investing less.
And the real danger
Yeah.
is that this cynicism, these habits of resisting and withdrawing effort, become deeply ingrained and transfer to all future situations involving assignments and demands.
Absolutely. This balking and resistance to demands becomes a learned pattern. We see it in toddlers testing boundaries, in adolescents seeking independence.
Right?
But in the context of underachievement, it can start surprisingly early in school, with peer influence becoming a significant factor in adolescence, where disparaging adult demands can be a misguided shortcut to social acceptance. And the onset of poor school performance in HPPs most commonly occurs during this adolescent period.
And sometimes unintentionally, parents and teachers can even encourage these undesirable patterns.
How s-
The author highlights how granting exemptions or cutting slack for gifted young people, while seemingly helpful in the short term, can actually teach them that they don't always need to meet expectations.
It's that idea that by not being firm about meeting demands, they become, in a way, accomplices and co-conspirators in the resulting cover-ups and diminished effort.
Yeah. And then there's the issue of providing the wrong kind of help, the rescue phenomenon, illustrated by the case of Kendra.
Kendra, who was a top student, uncharacteristically waited until the last minute to complete a major assignment, and her entire family rallied to help her, turning it into this big, memorable project. While well-intentioned, this sent a powerful message.
The message was, rescue is an option.
Right.
And each subsequent time Kendra struggled with a deadline, the family intervened. While it reduced her immediate anxiety, It also sabotaged her ability to develop crucial long-term project management skills.
So she didn't learn to manage it herself.
Exactly. She started to internalize the belief that she was bad at deadlines and needed help. This pattern then repeated itself later in her work life.
This highlights how overhelping can actually hinder the development of essential coping mechanisms and self-reliance. It can inadvertently reinforce a sense of inadequacy.
Yeah, definitely.
The author then brings in Cooper Smith's research on self-esteem, which offers a surprising insight.
Yes, Cooper Smith found that both the extremely low and extremely high self-esteem groups actually had underlying low self-esteem.
Wait, both low and high. How does that work?
Well, the reason failure would confirm their negative self-assessment. So both groups shared a preference for avoiding direct tests of their abilities where they might fall short.
Ah, okay, so avoidance was the key for both.
Yeah. Their strategies for avoiding this potential failure were the twin strategies the author mentions.
There were those.
Essentially, both groups avoided situations where they could be directly compared to others and risk coming up short. This avoidance, while protecting them from immediate discomfort, ultimately eliminated the possibility of experiencing real, satisfying accomplishment.
So it's a short-term gain, long-term loss.
Pretty much. In this sense, extreme risk-taking and extreme risk avoidance serve a similar function, to avoid true evaluation.
Which brings us to the process of excuse-making. The author provides some insightful examples here, starting with Denise.
Denise had extraordinary musical talent, but easily skipped over foundational learning like music theory without immediate negative consequences. Because she felt more talented than her teachers, she didn't take their suggestions to heart, leading to gaps in her skills that ultimately held her back.
And then there's Brad, who initially felt like he was betraying his own standards when he started making excuses for poor performance.
Right. His second quarter of college, with illness and a breakup, provided this convenient and easily accepted justification for bad grades.
And that one instance seemed to open the floodgates.
Right.
It became a pattern of inconsistent effort, downplaying his performance, a stark contrast to his earlier conscientious approach and his 99th percentile SAT scores.
Wow.
His language even shifted from expecting excellence to vague explanations like he just ran out of steam.
These examples show how easily we can slide into patterns of avoidance and excuse-making, especially when faced with challenges or the fear of not measuring up.
Yeah.
And as the author points out, at the brink of adulthood, these past choices really shape our approach to this next defining state.
Exactly. Talent alone isn't enough. More is required.
Yeah.
Sustained effort, resilience, a willingness to take risks.
Right.
And while some may shake off earlier in activity, others, like Tara, develop a hardened resistance to striving. Achievement isn't just those glamorous moments, it's the continuous, cumulative effort.
To illustrate this need for embracing change and the unknown, the author shares a beautiful Sufi parable of the river water facing the desert.
It's a lovely story, this idea that the water, while knowing what it is to be a river, must accept transformation into vapor to be carried across the desert and continue its cycle anew with more knowledge.
Resisting change would lead to stagnation.
Exactly.
And this resistance to change, the settling for less, often manifests in our work lives. The author presents a list of potential values we might seek in work, such as creativity, variety, helping others, income, security, and a positive environment.
And it's a good reminder that what we value most can differ greatly. But the author cautions against using this list to endlessly search for the perfect job as a way to avoid taking an imperfect but worthy opportunity.
It's a delaying tactic.
Absolutely. Choosing a career involves navigating trade-offs and really tuning into what's most important to you while also being realistic about the demands and effort required in most fulfilling professions. Many SLHPPs, the author notes, have little interest in or patience for that regimented preparation and those intense ongoing demands.
This can lead them to gravitate towards less demanding or unconventional work. The author uses civil service as an example, where the structured yet sometimes monotonous nature can be appealing, with coveted positions often being those that allow for off-site breaks from routine.
It highlights this preference for avoiding intense pressure and demanding responsibilities.
Yeah.
The author then shares the cautionary tale of Derek, who reacted impulsively to dissatisfaction with a good job.
Derek's story is a prime example of how reacting without careful thought can lead to taking steps backward in your career, resulting in regret and feeling trapped.
Ouch.
He didn't consult with anyone, and his confidence took a real hit.
The allure of independence in fields like sales and entrepreneurship can also be strong for SLHPPs. However, the author points out the necessity of disciplined effort to actually succeed in these areas.
Right, it's not all freedom.
No, without that discipline, the promised freedom can become a siren song that never delivers.
And even seemingly less structured options, like real estate sales or independent contracting, still require consistent self-promotion, building a reputation, and managing workflow effectively.
Yeah.
The author uses the example of the building trades to show how the temptation to chase new projects can lead to disorganization and unfinished work.
This avoidance of the real decision, that deeper question of what you truly want, is illustrated by Zach's story of starting a windsurfing business.
Zach's venture was presented as an interim step during his entrepreneurial phase, revealing a hidden ambivalence about his future and a struggle with the bigger decision of what he wants to do when he truly grows up.
It's a way of postponing that deeper engagement.
Yeah.
The author then provides a whole taxonomy of different forms of settling for less in work, these various job coasters.
Wow, a taxonomy.
Yeah. So while these patterns seem varied, the core insight is often a fear of commitment and a desire to avoid the discomfort of sustained effort required for genuine career growth.
We have the job coasters who do the bare minimum, the hiders who arrange to be overlooked, the niche builders who take on mundane tasks to avoid more challenging ones, the independent commandos who work on their own terms but lack reliability, the slashers who repeat what they already do well instead of growing, the hopscotchers who can't seem to commit, and the job surfers who drift between entry-level positions. It's quite a catalog.
It really highlights the diverse ways in which people can avoid fully engaging with their work lives.
Definitely.
And a common thread is often this tendency to delay adulthood and true career involvement.
Many SLHPPs want to wade into adult life a little more slowly, postponing those significant steps like a serious job or settling into a career.
Right.
The author points out the lack of a clear definition of adulthood, making it easy to postpone each step with seemingly practical reasons.
This can lead to a prolonged period of limbo marked by postponements and false starts. Graduate school, for example, can become a lengthy stopover where projects linger unfinished or multiple programs are started and abandoned.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Even taking a post-college breather, while sometimes beneficial, can for some represent an ambivalence and avoidance of adult responsibilities, as seen in Damien's regret.
And even when taking entry-level jobs, there's sometimes a gravitation towards the special, but ultimately mundane, almost as a way to escape feeling ordinary, as illustrated by Darla's lack of loyalty to employers.
Okay.
For others, work becomes purely a means to an end, like Rod, the parking lot attendant, who doesn't expect enjoyment but just sees it as funding his personal interests.
Which brings up the important point that career isn't the only path to fulfillment. The author references Einstein's patent office job as an example, highlighting the importance of passions pursued outside of work.
True.
However, for many SLHPPs, the issue isn't finding fulfillment elsewhere, but rather a general resistance to structure and authority in all aspects of life, as seen in Tanya's perspective.
And this avoidance, the author explains, can start small, like avoiding mail, and then generalize to major life choices, becoming a perceived personal trait. I am an avoider.
It's a self-justifying cycle.
Exactly. And crucially, avoiding details in life can really backfire, preventing us from reaching those deeper levels of satisfaction that take time and attention. The author's job posting exercise for one's own life is a powerful way to highlight this lack of stimulating goals.
Another significant area where avoidance can manifest is in our finances, as illustrated by Kevin's repeated patterns of debt and unrealistic financial projections.
Kevin maintains this fuzziness about his finances, almost to protect his feeling of freedom, but it ultimately leaves him consistently broke despite his earning potential. It's a common trait among SLHPPs, being enthusiastic and creative, but also impatient and impractical with money.
And the pursuit of leisure for SLHPPs often falls into a similar pattern of avoidance. The vague goal of kicking back rarely translates into real pleasure because of a lack of planning and initiative in their downtime.
Right.
True enjoyment of leisure, the author emphasizes, requires intentionality.
And just as with work and finances, satisfying relationships also demand effort and skill, particularly in navigating vulnerability.
Makes sense.
The author shares Cindy's tendency to avoid deep involvement in relationships to prevent feeling vulnerable, opting for light connections over genuine closeness, and missing out on developing those crucial relationship skills.
This avoidance of intimacy can take various forms, from hiders, using pretexts to avoid full involvement, to role players, adopting unpleasant personas to deter closeness, and relationship hopscotchers constantly searching for an elusive right person.
Now, navigating these patterns of avoidance can bring up the tricky emotion of regret. The author cautions against indulging in it, as it can lead to impulsive actions or complete immobilization, as seen in Derek's slow withdrawal from life after regretting his career decision.
That's rough.
Yeah. It's important to distinguish between taking responsibility for mistakes and simply attacking yourself.
Which finally brings us to the crucial question. How do we actually enact change? The author lays out some key principles. What are some of the most important ones that stand out to you?
Well, the emphasis on adopting a long-range perspective is key. Disappointing early results don't mean you're on the wrong path, just like exciting early results don't guarantee success.
Okay, long view.
Yeah. It's about committing to permanent changes rather than seeking a quick fix. And change, the author stresses, is something you do, not something that happens to you. Waiting just postpones it.
Absolutely. And it's a learning process that inevitably involves attempts and learning from mistakes. Failure is a necessary part of refining your skills.
Right.
Setbacks will happen, but it's your response that matters. And the author advises against trying to change everything at once. It's better to focus on a few specific changes at a time, guided by a considered plan.
And when it comes to overcoming that fear of failure, the author revisits the parable of the talents, highlighting how the steward who buried his talent out of fear was actually condemned for his inaction. Failing to try is already failing yourself, and talent is useless without expression.
It's that powerful idea of being unfaithful to your own potential. The author then quotes Rilke, emphasizing that everything alive embraces what is difficult. It's through those challenges that we grow.
And this leads to the idea of actually embracing failure as a path to growth. A life well lived will have its share of failures. If things always come easily, you're likely not pushing your boundaries.
True.
The author directly addresses the listener, acknowledging that even if you intellectually agree that failure is normal, you might still have a deep-seated desire to avoid it.
This avoidance then creates a negative cycle of withdrawing effort, doubting abilities, and a negative self-image.
Yeah.
To counter this, the author shares a personal anecdote about struggling with something new and uncomfortable, weighing vegetables in a Parisian grocery store.
It's a relatable story, that initial feeling of incompetence, followed by the sense of accomplishment and mastery after persisting through the discomfort. It illustrates that absorbing those jolts of change in pursuit of a dream ultimately builds competency.
The author then outlines the stages of change, starting with pre-contemplation, where you might be unaware of a problem or actively finding distractions. Diane's initial discomfort with her flat spot is a good example.
And then there's contemplation, where you acknowledge the problem and start weighing the pros and cons of change, feeling ambivalent but not yet committing to action.
Stuck in the middle.
Yeah. The author emphasizes that life is ultimately what you do with your time, and that change requires making specific, initially small adjustments to your habits and how you see possibilities.
And it's interesting to note that as you start to make progress, you might actually experience a surge of fear.
Really? Why?
It's almost counterintuitive, but it can happen precisely when you begin to accomplish something, leading to self-attack for not having started sooner.
So, what are the prerequisites for actually breaking through and making that change? The author talks about the crucial first step of intentionally committing to a new life, crossing that internal line.
And this involves specific imperatives, things like recruiting support, talking to others about your plans, learning the basic principles, developing master skills,
Okay.
creating order in your life and workspace, and even finding pleasure in ordinary tasks. These lay the groundwork for successful change.
And the author uses Trevor's experience of living intentionally as a prime example of this decisive commitment. It requires thoughtful preparation and a clear intention, a quiet but full vow to not stop until you reach your goal.
It's also important to be aware of the specific traps related to your particular style of underachievement that might prevent you from even starting.
Right, like delayers delaying.
Exactly. The author offers tailored encouragement for each style to overcome that initial resistance.
And sometimes that first step can be surprisingly small but incredibly symbolic, like Max buying an alarm clock after never having owned one.
An alarm clock.
Yeah. It's a concrete action that signals a shift from wanting to change to actually beginning to change, with ripple effects across other areas of life.
The author stresses the importance of starting, even if you don't feel completely ready. That feeling might be just another form of delay.
Good point.
You have to take that concrete first step that shows true commitment, because at that point, You're not fooling anyone but yourself.
And enlisting support is crucial, but it's also important to manage expectations with those around you and not abandon your responsibilities. Seeking outside help, like therapy, can be valuable if you're not getting the support you need.
Interestingly, the author cautions against seeking others' approval for your change efforts, as responses will vary and can even be discouraging. The decision to change is a personal one.
But support is still good.
Yes. However, having someone to check in with can be incredibly beneficial, providing accountability and encouragement.
Developing a constituency for support people you can learn from and seek information or skills from can also be valuable, even without revealing your entire plan. And to really illustrate the power of action and resilience, the author shares the story of Bresson's prisoner's meticulous escape.
It's a powerful reminder of our capacity for action, resourcefulness, and unwavering focus, even in seemingly impossible situations.
Yeah.
And one key element that supports action is creating order in your life.
Disorder, the author explains, disrupts progress and makes change harder. Creating a little order in all areas of your life, your home, workspace becomes an ongoing task that frees up mental energy for more important things.
This order arises from completing tasks and avoiding postponement.
And this leads to the idea of order and the art of working. The author describes their workshops using slow-motion physical tasks to promote a different kind of attention to work.
Slow motion. Interesting.
Yeah. The key is to find ways to make even boring tasks more engaging, viewing all work as an opportunity to create order, both internal and external.
Working from a methodical plan, the author stresses, brings enormous liberation and demonstrates the benefits of true efficiency, contrasting with the chaos of rushing and improvising. Ambivalence, as St. Paul said, makes us unstable. Overcoming that ambivalence is crucial for making progress.
Creating a dedicated workspace is another practical step, minimizing ambiguity and aiding focus. It should be as practical, efficient, and even appealing as possible.
Make it inviting.
Exactly. Beyond removing blocks, developing master skills is also essential, those skills that might have been neglected.
And practicing these master skills requires deliberate tasks that teach persistence and consistency, like hand sanding or weeding. The work you do works on you during these activities.
So the task itself teaches the skill.
Right. These skills are built through repeated small actions. This idea is similar to forming new habits by consciously linking a trigger to a desired action, a principle well established in behavioral change.
Persistence and patience are vital for any worthwhile venture. It takes time for results to appear. Nurture those new ideas long enough to take root, focusing on the process rather than just the goal.
Okay.
And the author then lays out 15 specific tasks to help initiate change.
15 tasks. Let's hear them.
Task 1 is formulating a clear and captivating dream. Task 2 is keeping a daily notebook for unfiltered free writing. Task 3 is cultivating resolve through visualization. Task 4 is creating a timeline to map out your campaign.
Okay, preparation, then action.
Yeah. Task 5 involves rewriting limiting conceptions as present tense choices. Task 6 is choosing new, less limiting conceptions. Task 7 is developing internal operating instructions linking new behaviors to triggers.
Like, if X happens, I will do Y.
Exactly. Task 8 is engaging in a language cleanse, using more empowering language. Task 9 is overcoming common obstacles to beginning.
And keeping going.
Right. Task 10 is acknowledging your progress, no matter how small. Task 11 is regularly revising your master plan based on new insights. Task 12 is developing contingency plans for potential setbacks.
Backup plans. Smart.
Task 13 is selecting a specific project to support your dream. Task 14 is applying the 5-minute rule to overcome resistance. And Task 15 is making the all-out push with consistent effort.
15 steps. Seems comprehensive. And even with these tasks, the author reminds us that stuff happens. Setbacks are inevitable, even when you're making progress.
Right, it's not smooth sailing.
No, it's about how you navigate those challenges.
The key is to view turbulence as an opportunity for growth, and to remember that your triumph will be sweeter when you prevail despite hardships. Maintaining progress, staying on track, requires constant vigilance against those subtle drifts from your purpose.
Keeping promises, especially to yourself, builds self-reliability. But be wary of overworking as a counterproductive trap. The Chinese story of could be good, could be bad reminds us of the unpredictable nature of events.
Serious changes have ripple effects across your life. Maintaining balance between different demands requires ongoing effort. Don't be discouraged if others' expectations start to rise. That's often a sign of progress.
Like altitude sickness.
Exactly. And remember, the Peter effect, your self-concept needs to keep pace with your developing capacities.
Procrastination ultimately hinders excellence. Consider using extreme deadlines to harness clarity and efficiency. And as you meet goals, the question of limits arises.
Should there be limits?
Well, the author advocates for seeking intrinsic rewards, like wisdom over power.
Shifting your perspective to view life as a school can significantly accelerate your growth. The goal is to imbue daily activities with the same attention you give to your dream.
True aliveness comes from giving life your personal stamp, making it a work of art.
Recognize the preciousness of time. Ask yourself how you want to spend this moment. Cultivate lively interests and rewarding activities. Make time work for you, giving attention to each moment.
Developing attention through practices like quiet sitting can be powerful. Making each moment excellent accelerates progress across the board, including relationships and self-knowledge.
Cultivate order in relationships and strive for sincerity.
Finally, the author offers guiding principles for living without regret. Embrace the unconventional, take calculated risks, keep exploring your curiosities, and build on your progress. As Catherine Butler Hathaway wrote, aim to make of yourself the poem.
Bon voyage, you. And thank you for sharing your own worst enemy with us for this deep dive. It's a truly insightful exploration into the multifaceted nature of adult underachievement, tracing its roots from early experiences and societal pressures to the various patterns it can take. But more importantly, it offers a powerful framework for change through self-awareness, intentional action, and a fundamental shift in perspective. We hope these insights have provided you with some valuable aha moments without feeling overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely some food for thought there.
For you, thinking about the sources you shared, does this resonate with anything in your own experience?
Consider which map you've been hesitant to pick up in your own life, and what even a 5-minute glance might reveal.
Good question.
If any of these themes resonate or spark further questions, we encourage you to revisit your sources with these new insights in mind.
This deep dive was tailored just for you, and we aim for it to be a resource that provides value far beyond a typical podcast listen. Until next time.